This reading is in Galatians 4, 1 through 7. My point is this: heirs, as long as they are minors, are no better than slaves, though they are the owners of all the property. But they remain under guardians and trustees until the date set by their father. So with us, while we were minors, we were enslaved to the elemental spirits of the world. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under law, in order to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as children. And because you are children, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a child. And if a child, then also an heir through God.
Thank you, Alan. May God bless the reading of the Word this day. So I want to talk about seasons today. I mean, that's what I came here to talk to you about. It's the new year, and the New Year's reading begins to talk about a time or a season for all things to happen, right? So I thought we'll start this thing talking about a season. And so I didn't say it in announcement time. I hate to bring it up in sermon time, but let's talk about one of the things, get it out of the way, that's really important that's been going on while I've been out of Texas is how about them Cowboys, huh? I mean, it's playoff season, and I think God is pleased, and especially because, well, I can think that, you know. But it's playoff time, and the playoffs are in Arlington today. How about that? Oh, it makes me a little nervous. They're undefeated on the road. I'm like, get out of Arlington and go beat somebody. So, but what about that? We were so delighted because December is not Tony Romo's season. You know that historically, and Tony Romo had a great December, and we didn't talk a lot about it. We were in Tennessee watching when we could, and but wow, Did y'all have a good season? Did Yuns have a good season? I've been in Tennessee, you know. Yuns know that, right? I trust it was a great Christmas here. Everything I heard was wonderful. I heard things that make a pastor feel wonderful and secure. Things like, we never noticed you were gone. It was just like you were always here. So I wanted to take a moment to point out that was because I worked really hard before I left that happened, okay? You see. I owe a great debt of gratitude and more to all of those who helped make things happen, and it's pretty much all of you in the room. Everybody did things, and I know that you were blessed. It was a different season for you. We talked about it before we left, and now you're on the other side of it, and you're going to have some time to reflect on it coming up. But, you know, exactly what did that season mean? How did it work without the pastor and the pastor's wife? How did it work? How did things happen? What was different? What was challenging? What was the blessing? Someone told me that they found out that ministering to the congregation was a great and wonderful blessing and that I had been saving it all for myself. And I said, no, I've just been doing it and getting it, and you should just get in there and grab some of it. Get a piece of this. So it's beautiful. And I'm reminded, too, let me throw this in as I get warmed up to preach today. What a community you are. And you know, I'm reminded when I travel that not all congregations are communities. Some are destinations where people go to worship. And some are very individualistic. It's about having salvation, and salvation is about a personal decision. And after that decision is made, there's not a lot of business left to do in the congregation. But this congregation is really about all the stuff that happens after all of that. And we've kept a focus on that for 13 years, and it shows. And this is a great community. I said it before I left, but I see it again. How wonderful you take care of each other. And what a season in all of your lives to be here. Not just the Christmas season, but what a season in your whole lives to be a part of a congregation like this. You know, I always tell people, all good things come to an end. You recognize that, right? Nothing lasts forever. And there will be a time when you'll look back at the good old days at Wylie Christian Church. And hopefully the congregation here will outlive all of us. But our influence and our experience here will certainly come to a close one day. And so savor it right now. It's a great season in your life. I want to tell you about the season that I had. I asked you for it. It was odd that you would give the minister, the pastor and his wife, the Advent season, the Christmas season to be gone. But I wanted to do things. It's been 15 years for Shannon and I that we experienced Christmas without being in charge of worship services, without being responsible for programming, without expectations on our time. I'm telling you, I missed all of it. I'm glad to be back, and I'm going to tell you next year's Advent season is going to be the best one ever. I promise you that. You got to wait a whole year, but it's going to be good. Woo! But I had just the most wonderful Christmas season, and this is going to sound like a total waste of time, but I did something I never get to do, Mr. Greg. I watched all of those stupid Christmas movies that all have the same plot, you know, Santa quits and somebody comes in and saves the day with the help of a reindeer and a sled. And whether it's, who's that big tall comedian that makes me tired? What's his name? The elf guy? The Saturday Night Live guy? Will Ferrell, yeah. I never thought I'd like that movie. I think I watched it 6 times in the cabin. The Disney Channel, they just played the old classics and the new movies over and over. I never get to watch those because I'm taking care of people. I watched all of those this year. Thank you. Because it doesn't mean much, but it was wonderful. It's wonderful. And I don't know how much pressure you put on your family, but I put a lot on mine. I would hate to be one of my kids, okay? And so we had the perfect drama. We had a cabin in the woods on the river. The first thing Shannon did was put out all the Christmas decorations. And it was like living in a Norman Rockwell painting. And the kids arrived on Christmas Eve. And we were waiting and anticipating and watching their progress, and they all got there on Christmas Eve, all our children. How much pressure is that on your kids to perform? I mean, tell me. I mean, y'all all have to get together and pool your money and get all the kids quiet and in the car and full of Benadryl or whatever you give them for the trip. I didn't say that, Dr. Jamie. I'm making it up. But... And so my children all showed up on Christmas Eve. Everybody in the family had a role in the drama, and it was perfect. It was perfect. I found out something about Advent. I'm going to save it for next year, but I'll give you a hint right now. I know why they do hope first. Because if you don't have hope, peace and joy and love will escape you. And I'm going to tell you something else. Hope is not in having all the money and the right cabin and the right location and being in the right place. I found out peace and joy are not about location, but it's about life. And our bodies and our minds were in a very peaceful place for this season, but our hearts and our lives were right here where they always are. And so it was a beautiful thing. It was a beautiful season. And so now we come to a new time, a new season, as we start into a new year together. I saw a movie. This was the last movie Jackie Gleason ever made, called Nothing in Common. Did any of you see that movie? It was not a particularly successful movie when it came out, but it has grown in sort of a cult following since then. Partially because it was Jackie Gleason's last movie. But it was also Tom Hanks' movie that brought him out of being seen as a comedic actor and showed the world that he could play a serious role. And it launched Tom Hanks into a whole new season and a whole new period in his own life and his own career. And the movie was about people going through the changes in season. Jackie Gleason played the aging father who just got fired from the job that he held for 35 years. Now, that's a change in season that is normally not welcome in someone's life. But it does come, doesn't it? It does come. Do you know that before I left on this sabbatical, one member of this great congregation, who I will not tell you who is, actually had the nerve or the presence of mind or the courage or the wisdom to ask me, how much longer? I thought he meant how much longer, or she, I'm not going to give away anything, how much longer before you leave for the trip. But the question was, how much longer will you lead the congregation? When is it time to be thinking? So you see, they're talking about seasons. I don't want that conversation right now. I want to be here a while. The good news is I made a 2-year commitment. I can turn that into 5 or 10 real quick. I've done it before. I took this thing in a season of my life. I was approaching 40, and people have asked me, when did you hear the call to preach? Well, I was probably in the 8th grade when that happened, but I didn't go to seminary. I went out and played rock and roll music, which became a very important part of my ministry later on. But at 40 or near 40, I started hearing this call. And I know now it was a move into a new season in my life. And they told me that church planter would be 3 to 5 years. And so I entered a 3 to 5 year season. And after 5 years, the congregation called me into full-time congregational ministry, which is different. I still say it's different. I'm still learning. And I still have a planter's heart. And you allow me to do this job that way. And so it works. But it's a whole new season. It has been a whole new season. And so in this movie, Jackie Gleason's son, played by Tom Hanks, is also going through a change in the seasons of his life. He's at that younger part where he just got the big promotion. And now more is expected out of him, and he's ready to go, and he's going to be a success. Except, doesn't it always happen this way? That when the job and when your life and when what you want asks more of you and you're ready to jump up and meet that set of expectations, that other things in your life that are just as important, maybe even more, that have been going along pretty good, all of a sudden things aren't the same. And so an aging parent may call and say, I need more of your time. And that's what happens in the movie. And so the son is now taking care of his father. There's a great scene in the movie where he's pushing his dad in a wheelchair, and Jackie Gleason says, with all of the charm and all of the warmth that Jackie Gleason ever had, he says to his son while he's pushing the wheelchair, I never thought it'd be you that came through for me. Isn't that something? It reminds me of this movie by Ram Dass. Do you know who Ram Dass is? I want to qualify him before I say anything about him, because I don't know if he's a Christian, and I'll let you do with that what you want. He was the youngest tenured professor at Harvard University by the name of Richard Alpert, and he said life was going great until Timothy Leary moved into the office next door. And then Alpert became a part of the psilocybin experiments, which were really supposed to be scientific studies into cognition and consciousness. And after a couple of years of that, and after being fired from Harvard, Timothy Leary went to Mexico to continue experimentation in hallucinogens, and Richard Alpert did what a lot of pop stars were doing. He went to India. He didn't sit with the Maharishna, who saw Eric Clapton and the Beatles and all those great people, but he sat with the Maharaji in the top of the Himalayas, a very different experience. And he came back to America a very different person named Ram Dass, which means God's helper in Sanskrit or in Hebrew, in Hindu. And so he became a great author and a great spiritualist. And he led like this whole generation, at least the hippie generation. We'll give them that. That was their religion, Ram Dass. And so Ram Dass now is in his 80s, and in his 70s he had a stroke. And he began to go through the rehab, and he did what he does. He wrote books, and he made a movie called Fierce Grace. He says in here, I am the voice of my generation, always calling back. I've been out there ahead of these folks saying, here's what to expect. And he said, in terms of this stroke, he said, I want to tell you that this is much nearer in your future than you ever imagined. Have you ever heard the words from your doctor, it's cancer? If you have, would you probably join Ram Dass in telling your friends this happened sooner than you ever expected? Have you heard the words that your parent is terminal, and now you have to give care to that person? It happens much sooner in your future than you ever imagined. The seasons change so very, very quickly on us. And so there I was on this great trip. And you asked me, did I have fun? I did. But when you're gone a month, everything ain't good. And so there was one day, just last week, when it was the very first time in my entire life I ever pushed my father in a wheelchair. My dad is a E6 Staff Sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, and he taught me how to be tough. My dad is tough. And it was very weird to be pushing him in a wheelchair. And I told him, I said, you know what I learned from Ram Dass, Dad? And of course, he didn't know who Ram Dass is, and he doesn't like hippies anyway. But he let me say it. He let me say it. And I said, you know what I learned, Dad? He told me that when he was driving his father around, his father was very contrary and very angry all the time, and he had to drive him. And he said, now that I sit over here in the seat that my father was in and someone else drives me, I understand what my father was thinking. And he said this, if I sit in this seat and I want to have the experience of being the driver, I'm going to be miserable. But if I decide that this seat is the experience that I am to have, then I'm going to be okay over here. It's changing the seasons. I hiked to 4 waterfalls, and every step of the way I realized that my father will never go there again. Can't breathe. He struggles to breathe. He can't get there. This is a new season in his life. Brand new. And you know what he didn't say while I was pushing him? He didn't say, of everyone, I'm surprised you're the one that came through, because he's not. He's not. He wouldn't have said that to me or my brother or my sister, because he equipped us. He taught us. And he never said, where are you when I need you either. I'm always here. He's there. But I had this opportunity. At the end of the day, I took my father to 2 doctor's appointments. It took up the entire day. We left at 8 in the morning, and we got home at 6 that evening, and he said, what do I owe you, son? What? I said, I don't think this is possible, Dad. You'd have to live a long time. I got to take you to a lot of doctor's appointments before we ever break even. I think I owe you. He said, no. I decided to do it before I did it, so there was no payment ever due. He never says things like that to me. Great guy. That's when we went to Shoney's. That's odd. I'm going to tell you, that wasn't in the sermon. Rick texted me that day, and he sends me scriptures and meditations, and one of them says, following the Father's instruction will always lead you somewhere good, or something to that effect. And I said, how weird you just sent that. My dad's instructions were stop at Shoney's, and now here I sit at the table. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? We did go to Shoney's. Yeah, always. Another coincidence. On the same day that I pushed my father in a wheelchair for the first time, I learned that my son was rearrested. So if you're wondering, because I wasn't here and I didn't see the news, you did. Yes, I know. He's in jail. Don't know when he's going to get out. They're not drug charges. And I'm this much sure that he's not doing drugs. Although I'm sure in jail he can do what he wants. And it's a season. You know, even he was a player in the family drama. Because if he hadn't relapsed and if he hadn't gotten in trouble, my granddaughter would have been here for Christmas, but she was at the cabin with us, and it would have been a very different holiday for all of us. So even he played a role. So what do you do with that? It's a real season. I want to be angry and I want to be upset, but you know what happened on the way home? I told my daughter and her friend to bring the baby in the car, and the car had been checked out and was running well, and the oil was changed and had 4 brand new tires on it. The last 2 days we drove through some very torrential rain across the southeast. If you watched the Weather Channel, you saw it. It was here as snow, and it moved, and ice, and it moved east. And for 2 days we drove through this, and the car would hydroplane at 45 miles an hour. And I'm thinking, it's probably not hydroplaning. They're just scared. And after 2 days, I drove the car, and the front end was off. It's weird. And I said, oh, there's a problem here. I'm lucky they're not dead. And the next morning, I looked, and the front tires were bald. Bald. They were hydroplaning all over the road with a baby in the back seat. I don't know how to be angry about my son being arrested, because I could cry out and say, God, in this season of my life, why don't you finally bless me? And sometimes there's a blessing in the middle of the season, and you don't get it because you didn't see the tires were bald. No reason in the world why those 3 children aren't dead today. And yet, we're all here. Those blessings are there in every season. And it's easy when things are going good, but some seasons carry with them pain and challenges. And even then, you have to remember. You know who I want to be? I want to be Simeon. I want to be that guy in the story about Jesus' dedication. You know, here's Jesus, God in the flesh, and even God is honoring the seasons of men. Taking the baby after 8 days, as is the custom. Do you hear those words? As is the custom. What need does God have for any of your customs or mine? None. Yet God bends God's self down to my level to say, I'll meet you right there at the table, at the festival, at the Christmas celebration. I'll meet you in the hospital. I'll meet you in the ward. I'll be there when you're pushing your father in the wheelchair or when you're weeping over the casket. I want to be Simeon, because Simeon has lived under oppression his whole life, believing that God is going to send a deliverer, and he's got so old that he doesn't even think he's going to live long enough to see it. He's going to be born in oppression, and he's going to die in oppression. And he looks at this little baby, and he says, I can die believing. I can die with confidence. I can die knowing that my beliefs were not in vain because I've seen it, the deliverer. I wonder what he saw. Or here you go, here's a challenge. I wonder if all he saw was a baby. There you go. I wonder if it took all of his life to be able to look at a baby and say, here is the hope of the world. Here is the salvation of my family and yours. Wow. When Paul spoke to the Galatians, there were people telling them that you're not really part of this because you don't know how to do it. You don't know the rules. You weren't born to the right family. Even though Simeon says in the Luke reading, this is a light to who? The Gentiles, not just Israel. But yet, all of Israel is telling the Galatians, you're not Jews, you're not doing it right, you're not in the in group, you can give this up. And Paul is telling them you're free of that. There's a great freedom in that, and here is the freedom. It is that you're not a borrower, you are not a beggar, you are princes and princesses, you are sons and daughters, you are children, heirs, because in just the right season and time. Now, what does that mean? I used to think that it was when they practiced crucifixion because God would choose the worst form of death, to hang naked on a pole. Or I used to think that it was, and I learned this, 100 years before Jesus, guess what happens? Globalization. Boom! The Silk Roads open up. China becomes part of the rest of the world. Did you ever think about, in the time of Jesus, they were experiencing globalization to the magnitude that we are today? At just the right time and the right season, Jesus comes into the world. And in just the right season of our lives, God reminds us through that relationship that God resides in us, with us, and that we are heirs. That it is our inheritance. Heaven, deity, sacredness, holiness. That is it. And in all seasons, that is the reality. So what do we do with all this? Well, I'm not sure. But I'm quite confident that it was not just for you or just for me. But that in learning how to take all of this and make it a glory to God has something to do with showering it on you, on others. And by the way, Christmas is a season. It's not over yet. This is the Sunday. Next week we begin Epiphany, a time to reflect and a time to think about what this season has taught us. A time to plan and to move forward. But this is still the season of Christmas. And I'm reminded of something that I've heard, a truth that I heard in the most fundamental places during this last month. And it's one you know, and that maybe it's good to remind ourselves that it shouldn't just be in December. It shouldn't just be during Advent. But we should live every day in the reality of Jesus, of the Spirit that has come to live within us, that has made us compassionate people, that has given us a faith to declare with Simeon that I have seen the salvation of the world, and that has given us hearts to be broken and to move beyond our concern for ourselves and into true community with others. That is the Spirit of Christ that has come to live in each and every one of us, that has made us heirs. Amen. Thank you, Cinda. What a wonderful way to close the sermon. Amen. Will you pray with me?